Right now, I am in what is probably my favorite historic destination in the United States. I'm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and I've spent quite a bit of time here in the past. But the reason I'm here this weekend is for the Gettysburg Film Festival, which I'm extremely excited about. So we've got some things going on here at the Majestic this weekend and other places here around Gettysburg. Ken Burns is going to be in town, Martin Sheen, Sam Waterston, and we're going to get to some of that later. But first, I want to show a little bit of history associated with the battle that typically gets overlooked here in Gettysburg. I've moved to the north end of town, and we are currently by the Adams County Historical Society. And if you look out behind me here, kind of on that rise in the distance, well, that is what is now known as Barlow's Knoll. On the first day of the battle, you have Howard's 11th Corps that has come up here to this part of what would be the battlefield. And essentially, they are going to get hit hard, and they are going to be pushed back through town. And a guy by the name of Coster, his brigade, is going to be sent to kind of cover the retreat. So here at the Adams County Historical Society is the county historian, Tim Smith. So he's going to kind of walk us through some fighting that took place at an area known as the Brickyard.
On the afternoon of July 1st, 1863, General Oliver Otis Howard's 11th Army Corps was positioned in the fields north and northeast of the town. In the first day's fighting, they were overwhelmed by great numbers, and they were driven back. Throughout the fight, Carl Schurz asked General Howard to send reinforcements into this area to try to stem the tide of the Confederate attack. And at the end, almost when it was too late, Charles Coster's brigade was sent out here to assist. And by the time they got out to this position, Schurz ordered them into the area here, northeast of the town of Gettysburg, to cover the retreat of the 11th Army Corps as the men fled through the town and back to Cemetery Hill. Coster's brigade was only in position for a few minutes. 3 of the regiments were placed along a fence line near a brick kiln, and when they got out here, 2 brigades of Southern infantry came up and over a rise of ground in front of them and fell upon them. The 134th New York suffered horrible casualties when they were outflanked and driven back. The 154th New York suffered heavily at this location. According to the statistics on the back of the monument, 1 man was killed, 21 men were wounded, and then very quickly they were overrun, and like 178 men from the unit were captured. Now, looking at the casualty figures in the rosters of the regiment, their figures were actually a little bit higher than is shown on the back of the monument. This unit suffered the second highest percentage loss of any regiment in the battle for the Northern Army. And they suffered the #1 total men captured of a Union regiment in the battle. And over the years, there's a tendency to make light of the fact that men are captured during these battles. But men from this unit served in prison, in Libby prison in Richmond, and later some of them went to Andersonville. And I think it's really interesting on the side of their monument that they actually give a number for the men who died in prison. And we're told that the actual number is about 60. They put 42 here on the monument. The monument was dedicated on July 1st, 1890. And it is in a location that is just one of the rarely visited places on the battlefield.
Now, as Tim was talking, you might have noticed this giant mural behind him, and it is really something. Now, this hasn't been here, historically speaking, I wouldn't say especially long. This was painted by a guy named Mark Dunkelman, and he had a relative or an ancestor who was in the 154th New York. Now, that ancestor wasn't here during the Battle of Gettysburg, but anyway, he had a lot of passion, for the history of this unit. And when he would come out here to this part of the battlefield, he noticed that there were never any other visitors. It didn't get much attention. So he secured permission to paint this mural on the side of this building right here where the Brickyard had formerly stood. So here you can see Union soldiers on the other side of the fence, and then as we progress down, then you can see where the Confederates are making a charge. So these Confederates would have been under Avery and Hayes. So you're talking about North Carolinians, the North Carolina Tar Heels, and the Louisiana Tigers. But there are all kinds of little details in here. One including, hang on a second, this one right here where you can see on the canteen, you can see there's a name on it for J.A. Williams. Well, on the Elliott burial map, which was a map that showed where different individuals and bodies and horses were buried on the battlefield, after the battle left here, well, one person who is named on that map is J.A. Williams from the 6th North Carolina. Now, as Tim and I have been here on this part of the battlefield, you may have noticed there's a lot of noise around us. There's somebody running a weed eater over here. There's a trash truck that is operating behind us. And there are houses all around us here. Well, it wasn't always that way.
The fight at the Brickyard was no skirmish. There were about 3,000 men involved, depending upon how you count. And the units that fought here suffered about 700 casualties, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. But as a place as huge as Gettysburg, it should come to no surprise that we can't preserve every area where the fighting took place. And some areas got left out of the preservation and interpretation of the battlefield. So this area, there were monuments placed here during the years that the GBMA administered the property. And then the War Department actually purchased this land, but they just purchased a strip of land and referred to it as Coster Avenue, and put the monuments and markers on this, and then they did not make any effort to preserve the area where the Southern advanced, or where the heavy fighting took place, or where the 134th New York got outflanked. And a lot of people are surprised by this, but I want to read you a passage from the National Park Service Commission report from 1904. The instructions issued to the commission were wise: to purchase from time to time but small parcels of land instead of large tracts. For the important events of the great battle could be commemorated by monuments occupying but a comparatively small space. And the needless purchase of great areas would not only cost heavily, but would entail a continuous useless expense to maintain them. In our opinion, the acquisition of any further extensive tracts of land here by the U.S. government would be a waste of public funds. And so the idea was that this area was undeveloped farmland and would always remain undeveloped farmland. But as you can see, by looking around us, such was not the case. I would say the monument to the 27th Pennsylvania Volunteers is a unique monument on our battlefield. And you can see just the style of it and the material. It's not made like other battlefield monuments. It's more like a tombstone from a cemetery. Now, this monument was dedicated in 1884, and it was originally on East Cemetery Hill, where this unit fought in the second and third day of the battle. But in 1889, they replaced that monument with a more substantial stone, and they moved this one out here to their secondary position, they call it, on the first day's battlefield. And you know, the Adams County Historical Society has a feature on YouTube called Monuments Monday, and we talk about monuments on the battlefield and moved monuments on the battlefield and the details of the different dedication ceremonies. So check that out.
When you come out to a site like this, it really puts an exclamation point behind the importance of preserving these battlefields. I've talked about the American Battlefield Trust often. It's one of my favorite organizations, and they do a lot of great work to protect these battlefields for future generations. People back in the early 1900s thought that it would be farmland forever. And now it's developed, and we've lost a lot of the battlefield from the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, if you look at this mural behind me, you'll notice that here at the Brickyard, you're kind of looking at the edge of town, and there are a couple of civilian homes right up here depicted on the mural. Well, Tim's going to take us to a few homes that were actually here during the battle that are still here today.
So the area of town that we're in is just outside the northeastern outskirts of the borough. And at the time of the Civil War, this area was just beginning to develop. Stratton Street had been put in the late 1840s. And you might notice on a map that I'll make sure we provide here that the Harrisburg Road at that time actually came out across through this area. And I believe that Custer's Brigade came out through the center of the town and out along this Harrisburg Road and then over into the area where they had the Brickyard fight. Now, two houses here stand and were here at the time of the battle. There were four in this area at the time. But these two houses, the John Kuhn house and across the street, the Barbihan house, both have artillery shells sticking out of them to this day. So you might know that there are 9 buildings in the borough of Gettysburg with artillery shells sticking out of them. Some of them from the battle, some of them cemented into the buildings later to mark where an artillery shell hit during the fighting. But you can actually see a Hotchkiss shell sticking out of the building here, presumably as it hit the building on July 1st or 2nd or 3rd, 1863. Now, during the battle, massive amounts of Northern soldiers retreated through the town and back to Cemetery Hill. Thousands. It's really hard to say exactly, but I like to tell people that on the first day of the battle, 20,000 Northern soldiers retreated through the town, and 30,000 Southerners were chasing them. And civilians were hiding in their cellars. And in this area, there were people in the Kuhn basement and people in the Barbihan house during the fighting. And if you visit the Adams County Historical Society, it is a house such as this that we are interpreting in our Caught in the Crossfire presentation. A family huddled in the cellar as the town is being overrun.
right, so that's a little bit on the fighting that took place around the Brickyard on the north end of town on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, as Tim mentioned, on the YouTube page of the Adams County Historical Society, they have Monuments Mondays, where Tim's too humble to admit it, but you get access to Tim Smith's brain. And honestly, there is no one who knows more about the Battle of Gettysburg than Tim Smith. So definitely encourage you to go check out that YouTube page and subscribe to it and watch their content, because I've learned so much from it. All right, we are going to head back over to the Adams County Historical Society and talk a little bit more history with Ken Burns. So one thing that I was curious about, when I first started video editing, there was an effect with Apple iMovie or something called the Ken Burns effect. So I mean, obviously you've influenced a lot of filmmakers, and I'm kind of curious, who were your influences?
Well, mine were a variety of ones. A lot of them, I grew up watching feature films, both old and present and new, and a lot of documentaries kind of came to me later. But I think that I've tried to take the influence from any good art, whether it's music or painting or dance or theater or literature or whatever, because they're all the same thing. Leo Tolstoy said, art is a transfer of emotion from one person to another. And I love that idea, that you're just giving away something that you've felt and feel that it's worthwhile to give it away, whether it's in the form of a painting, The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, or War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, or whatever it might be. That's it. And Steve Jobs just saw the popularity of the Civil War series and all the subsequent series, and back in 2002, 2003, and wanted to sort of approximate that for people who downloaded. So he brought me in and said, we want to create this thing. And so I said, okay. I mean, it's a very simplified version of what we try to do to wake up an old photograph. So.
All right, so I got this question from another YouTube content creator named Matt B. Got a scenario for you. You're approached by a major studio or streaming service, and they are creating a sitcom. And the basis of the sitcom is set in the White House. And they're the ghost of two presidents who are in the White House. Which two are you picking, keeping in mind entertainment value and what's going to be the most interesting?
Oh, Lincoln and FDR, without a doubt. They're the, when you have an argument about the best presidents, you're usually an argument about Lincoln and FDR, but you actually have to say besides George Washington. And working on a history of the revolution, which I'm doing right now, you realize no him, no us. So besides George Washington and his example of giving up first his military commission, and then, people were happy to have him there for life. And he said, I'm leaving after 2 terms. Set an example that has just been spectacular around the world. But these two people are so interesting and so fraught, deeply flawed people, deeply interested people, and the dramas that attend their lives, first the Civil War and then the Depression, and by the way, the Second World War, the greatest cataclysm in world history, make them, without a doubt, the most important people that you'd want to be engaged in.
So the reason I started my channel is I wanted to provide a resource for teachers to take their students to different places that they might not be able to take them otherwise. And earlier we were talking a little bit about the value of history education. So there's value in science, technology,
of course,
math. What is the argument that history and civics should have an equal seat at the table?
Well, I would say an even more equal seat than science, technology, engineering, and math. We get too specialized. We get off into our own little silos, and we can't interconnect and see the larger picture. The poet, and you're only going to learn that in a literature class, the poet William Blake says you could find the world in a grain of sand. So you're just as I see it as the architecture of the atom bears a remarkable similarity to the architecture of the solar system. So if we're all in our own little silos, we don't talk to each other and we don't know that which connects us. So history is central, civics is central, particularly for Americans, because we're the first country on earth that says that its people aren't subjects, they're citizens. And that requires lots of education and lots of doubt and lots of testing and being careful in the way you get your information, how you get your information, and getting multiple sources of information. And we're not taught that. Civics isn't just 100 senators and 435 representatives and, 3 branches of government. And I'm sorry to say that most students can't even tell you that simple thing. And so we have to be reinvigorating how important it is. And history is the key here, because if you don't know where you've been, you can't possibly know where you are and where you're going. And if you just buy the right things, if you're just part of a marketing existence, you will lose, because the inevitable vicissitudes that visit every human being will visit them and visit you. And unless you're armed to take care of them, you won't be able to. And history probably provides the best armor I know.
All right, well, hey, that was just pretty dang cool to be able to sit down and have a few minutes with Ken Burns and kind of pick his brain on a few things. Hey, I mentioned earlier that the reason we're here is because of the Gettysburg Film Festival. Make plans to come to this thing next year, because it is absolutely incredible. I had a great time and I've learned a lot. So you can come here, you can see the films, you can walk the battlefield, you can visit the museums. Just an incredible experience. And also check out the YouTube page of the Adams County Historical Society. But yeah, great weekend.